Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever all of us are. I'm truly honored to have this opportunity to welcome such a great panel and audience. 2020, to many of us, is still a super year for biodiversity, as had been intended, despite the challenges brought about by COVID-19 pandemic, and one that emanates with a powerful message. What's the message? That human beings, to benefit from nature, it is a prerequisite that our relationship with nature must transmute. Already last year, Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services warned us all about the magnitude of the global loss of biodiversity. Overall, 3/4 or 75% of the terrestrial environment and 2/3 or 66% of the marine environment have been potentially tainted by our human deeds. The economic impact is momentous. Between 1997 to 2011, the world has already lost around $4 to $20 trillion per year in ecosystem services due to land cover change, and 6 to 11 trillion per year from land degradation. Just recently, the World Economic Forum report affirmed that more than 50% of the global GDP, which generates about $44 trillion of economic value, are largely dependent on nature. Because nature is a public good, it is today unfortunately considered free and thus overexploited. The result has been in public cost and private profits. The effect is that nature risk is a non-material in much of financial decision making. Let me give an example. The Dutch Central Bank, in its report last month, estimates that Dutch financial institutions worldwide have about 510 billion euros in exposure, which is about 36% of their total assets, to companies with high dependence on one or more ecosystem services. This clearly shows that, considering nature in its equation, the financial sector can be a critical enabler of transformative improvements in economies and markets and contribute positively to halting biodiversity loss. The sector is already scaling up activities on climate change, but it needs to look beyond carbon. To avoid risks and find new opportunities, it has to examine both financial dependencies and impacts, not just on climate, but also on nature assets and services that are provided to the business sectors it invests in and lends to, which if lost at scale, will destabilize the global economy. And it has also to report on its actions. We know that biodiversity was seen to be more complicated than climate change. Tools and data were perceived not to have been sufficiently developed. However, we are delighted that currently many initiatives are emerging in the financial sector that address these concerns. Several organizations are already developing tools, data, and financial mechanisms to address the situation. Delighted that something is happening, but there is need to raise the ambition. Nature-related disclosure will enhance the role of the private sector in mobilizing adequate finance and actions for the successful implementation of an ambitious post-2020 global biodiversity framework under development. For instance, work is currently underway with the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosure, and we will need to make an urgent progress on this. The topic that is before us today for discussion is thus very well timed. We want the task force outcomes to contribute to the global framework and its long-term approach on mainstreaming. We will need to channel collective leadership to reverse nature loss and create inclusive nature development pathways and achieve the Convention's vision of living in harmony with nature. It is now my pleasure and great honor to introduce Right Honorable Lord Zach Goldsmith, UK Minister of State for the Pacific, International Environment, Climate and Forest and Animal Welfare, who will explain to us why nature is more important than just climate change considered on its own. I wish you all a great event and welcome His Lordship, the Minister.